Hi, and welcome to Real Trail Talk. I am Donovan D'Souza from The Long Ways Better.
And I'm Mark Pybus from The Life of Pi. Welcome to episode 98. We are continuing on the theme from the last episode, except I'm here and I apologise for not being there last time. But all is well in my world, and we are talking about Kiandra and Kosciuszko on the Australian Alps Walking Track.
Kiandra.
Yeah, and what's the way you say Kosciuszko? Because it's not Kosciuszko, is it?
No, it isn't. Yeah, you're right. So it's both Kiandra and Kosciuszko.
Kosciuszko. Yeah, because I was spelling it out today. I was like, yeah, it's not really Kosciuszko. Kind of the Australian thing to say.
Yeah.
This is something you did in March or April?
It was April, I think. Yeah, and so it wasn't meant to be then.
Yeah, so as we've discussed many times over the years, Don's trips don't always go to plan. But at least you got out here after a 3-month delay.
Yes.
From Christmas.
Yeah.
So first off, why this section of the AAWT?
So I wasn't meant to be doing this walk at all. I was meant to be doing the Snowy's Alpine walk. And what happened was, first of all, they were just not ready in time. They were like a year late. So while there's a big celebration now, I'm like, yeah, that's great. Because I was meant to do it in December 2023. Now, 2 weeks before I was meant to do this, I just couldn't walk all of a sudden. My foot just was in a lot of pain, and I discovered that I had Achilles tendinopathy. So, my history of trips being cancelled at the last minute continued in 2023.
Yeah.
I had all the bookings made, and I thought, look, I want to do it again. I'll find another time. So Easter was the time, and so I did it this in 2024 in Easter instead.
Yeah. So logistically, this is probably an easy way to break up the AAWT, because a lot of people have difficulties trying to get food drops and everything else.
Yeah, for sure. So the Kiandra to Kosciuszko is considered the nicest stretch in a lot of ways, both logistically, because there's relatively easy transport. It's a decent section in between, in that you don't have to carry that much, and the scenery is pretty good. So that was the main reason that I did this section. The other option was Kiandra to Thawa, which is walking towards Canberra and to the I guess northern or eastern terminus for the trail. But that section is like a wilderness, and the trail is poorly maintained, and it's like walking through grass. And I just was not in the mood for that, particularly in summer. I think in April I would have been okay with it, but I was a bit disinterested in having to walk through snaky grass in summer. Yeah,
and given the weather that you got as well, it's probably a good thing you weren't walking through kind of knee-high grass if it's going to be wet all the time.
Yes, yes.
So for those playing at home, this is typically a 6 to 7 day section, 125 to 130 kilometres. So fairly easy, and there's lots and lots of options for camping with the huts and everything, so you can break it up a lot of ways.
Yeah, so this section is great because unlike a lot of other sections where the facilities are lacking, there's a lot of huts and there's lots of options for how you cut it up. So I definitely passed more huts than I needed to for accommodation reasons, and there are some that are off the track and some that have been burnt that are being rebuilt as well. Yeah. So there's plenty of ways to cut it, and also generally speaking, there's good water sources, which is not always the case on the AAWT, and also toilets. So happy days for me because I had everything I wanted. I'm not really fussed about the huts, but I definitely prefer walks that have toilets and where a water source is relatively easy.
I mean, based on the videos, some of the huts didn't exactly look like inviting places to stay, and a lot of them are emergency use only as well, aren't they?
That's right. I mean, so there is a bit of a culture in the high country with the hut preservation that they don't really encourage you to stay in them. It's sort of like emergency only, but a lot of people do stay in there, but I think it's just to cover their asses for insurance. And also some of them are a bit dodge, as we'll talk about.
Yeah. All right. So let's get started. So you began in Kiandra. Tell us a little about what that is. It's
Yeah,
not a
so
big town, is it?
it's a ghost town.
Ghost.
It's basically nothing now. It's just like the remnants of what was there. So it was a mining town that eventually closed down, as a lot of mining towns do when the mines dried up. And so what's left is there's a cemetery, there's some buildings, and there wasn't very much. Now, I was dropped off in pretty inclement weather. It was like full-on gale force winds. And as we were driving out, it was like just like driving rain. But I was actually very lucky because when I got there, it was windy, but the rain stopped, and it was just like a very light, just dampness, nothing too bad.
Yeah, nice. And in terms of logistics of getting out there, you hired someone to drop you off. How
Yes.
far is it from like the nearest major town?
It's not close, so it's quite expensive, and reasonably so, because it's a long drive out. So I stayed in Jindabyne, and it's taking you sort of like around the mountain. So it's like, as far as the crow flies, it's not far, but it's quite far because you have to go around like the Lake Jindabyne, and up into the mountains and going around. So it was a considerable drive, and it's quite costly for one person. Like if you were doing it in a big group, it's not too bad, but not unreasonably so.
Yeah. All right, let's get started on day one. So for you, this was about 22 kilometers.
I think so.
Yeah. So you did Kiandra to Broken Dam Hut.
Yes.
So tell us about the start and what it's like beginning this trek.
Yeah, so this first day, look, it wasn't the greatest visibility. So there's two things, I guess, to be said about this section, is that it is almost 100% on vehicle tracks, which is unattractive. I think in general, I don't see that as the best thing. However, unlike the Bibbulmun track, where when you're on a vehicle track, sometimes you can really see signs of humanity and their influence everywhere.
Yeah.
You don't see that. So you see wilderness. Like you look out and there's just nothing but the wilderness. I would generally be quite negative about the vehicle track, but I was actually quite positive about it in this sense, because it's fine. And it's not like here where, like on my most hated road, Marin Road, it's like too wide and, quite just obnoxious, and it feels, and in terms of the scale versus a human.
Yeah.
Whereas this is like, a bit grown in, it's just like a little bit of a track, and it doesn't feel so bad. And also I barely saw people, so that made it, made it feel more wild. And the weather made it feel wild for sure. What wasn't great was that this area has been quite severely burnt. So there's a lot of walking through burnt lands.
Yeah.
So that's something that, particularly on that first day, was quite noticeable. Lots of dead, just skeletons.
Yeah, certainly the pictures were like the dull grey skies and, skeletal trees and grasses everywhere. It didn't look super appealing, but I'm guessing it felt a lot different while you're out there.
Oh yeah. So I think that even though the skeletons were not the best, when you have that moody weather, it does kind of feel nice. So it wasn't like the most exciting scenery in that sense, but I think given, I think from what I saw on the second day where it was sunnier, I much preferred this, and that really, the moodiness of it and the atmospheric quality was great, and you do get to see, you get to see mountains in the distance and things like that, so that definitely adds to it.
Yeah. And your lunch stop was at, was it 4 Mile Hut?
Yeah.
So the first of the kind of historic huts that you came across.
That's right. So 4 Mile was burnt down fairly recently in the 2020 fires, but they've rebuilt it, and they've rebuilt it, basically as it was. I think people who've seen it said, oh yeah, it looks much like what was there before. And they do a really good job. I think there's, of replicating the feel of an old hut. So it was nice to go and see it. I think it was only just built, like an open, like a few weeks beforehand. And that's the great thing about this is it's kind of like the Bibbulmun track in the sense of you get to, like, pull into a hut, have a meal and sit down and enjoy that aspect of it. So it's certainly the historical aspect of it, of these being these drover huts or miner huts, is a nice quality to the trail that's quite different. And it's good to break it up because then you feel like, oh yeah, I've got to this point, which is, I always feel that on the bib when you get to like a hut if you're doubling that day.
Yeah, and especially like if it's quite open wilderness, if you don't have somewhere to stop, it's kind of just like, oh, I'll just stop randomly in this open grassy field. Like, it's nice to have those features to stop at.
Absolutely. Yeah, you got it.
Yeah. So what was the walking like from 4 Mile Hut to the view, to the hut at Broken Dam where you stayed the night?
It was pretty easy. Like, I didn't think that the walking was very hard. So, I mean, it is in high country, but a lot of it is plains. So there's a bit of ascending here and there, but, I've walked hillier sections of the Bibbulmun, so it wasn't too bad. And it was really good because in the late afternoon, the weather had cleared up and I got to see Tabletop Mountain. So when I got to the junction, I could see Tabletop Mountain sort of looming overhead, which is, it's quite an impressive looking mountain. And the next morning it was cloudy again, so I didn't get to see it. Yeah. So then you take the 4 Mile Hill Trail, which takes you to Broken Dam Hut. And this one, I think it was one that actually survived the fires. But in John Chapman's guidebook for the AAWT, the area around the hut looks amazing, but it's like it's not like that anymore. Yeah,
I noticed from the video, it just kind of looked like, you were walking and it was just like a hut in the middle of a grassland, just kind of like placed there randomly.
Yeah, because it used to be sort of nestled in snow gums. So if you know what snow gums look like, they're magnificent trees, but they've all been burnt, and yes, they'll come back, but it's going to take a long time. And what really sucked here was there's supposed to be a water source just before the hut, and I passed 2 or 3 and I was like, it'll be fine, because they weren't, so in the map they weren't marked as water sources, they were just creeks. I was like, so if these are flowing, then the one that's marked as a water source should be flowing. Nope. Nope. So that really screwed me for the next day, because I had it's like my longest day. And it was I think it was 20 Ks before I got to water. So that sucked.
And how far back was it to go if you had to backtrack to get water? It
was a couple of Ks. And look, it probably would have been more sensible. I had time, but I also couldn't be bothered.
You had more pressing things on your mind, like sitting in the hut with a fire.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember you, because you texted us at this point, didn't you? The little hiking group we had. I've made fire, and how wonderful is this?
Yeah, so they all these huts have fire, and you are allowed to light fires, and they have wood there that you can use. So I used didn't go overboard, but I used a bit of wood there. It was blowing a gale, so I definitely was like, I think this counts as an emergency.
The memory I have of picturing you in the hut was just sitting in a rocking chair with like a brown and orange smoking jacket, like a pipe, and like, oh, jolly good, I've got a fire and it's windy.
Yeah, not far off. I mean, I didn't have a smoking jacket, but I was really enjoying it. I was by myself. There was no one else there. Someone did rock up in the middle of the night randomly, but I was, I had the place to myself. I, listened to a podcast, and it was really nice in there. Yeah.
Nice. So day 2, so this was quite a long day for you, to McKay's hut. Or
yes.
what was it? What did you call it?
So I've heard so people say Mackay because of like the town in Queensland, and then people say Mackeys, and some people say McKay's. Who knows? It's one of those.
Yeah, Noits, Nates, whatever.
Yeah.
So obviously you said before you couldn't see Tabletop Mountain, but you joined the Tabletop Trail. So watching the videos back, I was just amazed that they've got so many of these differently named trails that they all then link up to the AAWT.
Yeah.
So obviously, like, you've got the guidebook and you know which ones to follow, and it's well marked.
Yeah.
Did it ever get confusing out there to which one you were meant to be on?
Not really. There were one or two times where it was like, is it this way or that way? But mostly it's pretty good. And, parks, New South Wales, I think they do a pretty good job. And so they have signage at every junction, and it's really clear what it is. Like, I think their signage is possibly better than WA's signage. It's, I think from a trails perspective, the markers through the section aren't very good. It's a bit, not compared to the bib, which is probably an overkill at times. But at every junction, the signage is kind of more like a street sign. So it's like really clear where you are and what that next road is. Whereas, sometimes here, because they have those old wooden signs on the junctions, sometimes they're burnt, sometimes they're rotten away, and they've not replaced it. So in that sense, if you're doing like sort of fire trail walking, it's probably better.
Yeah, I did find that on the Goldfields track in Victoria. There was no like markers per se, but if you got to a junction, there was a million different options and like pointing you in the right direction. So it was like 2 kilometers before you'd see something, but you knew you were still on the right path. Weirdly, So to start with, you only had a liter of water and enjoying life,
and I needed that for breakfast as well.
Yeah.
So, yes, I was having the Radix breakfasts, so that uses a fair bit of water.
Yeah,
and I'm like, I guess I have half a liter.
But the walking doesn't look like too difficult. Just like open plains. There's a place called the Dip, which was aptly named.
Yeah, that was like a big drop and then an up. So that it was a bit hilly, and it was just really open. That was the thing that sucked because it was hot. Yesterday, the day before had been cloudy. The first start of the morning was cloudy, but then it cleared out. And while it meant I got to see the scenery, it also meant it was hot.
Yeah.
So that wasn't great. But what I did see was nice. So like being able to see the surrounding mountains is that's certainly a highlight. And the skies up there are incredible. I don't think that the videos really do justice to how pretty the skies are.
Yeah, it's because it's that very limited view on your screen. But when you're walking in real life, it's 270 degrees. You got a massive field of vision.
Yeah. As Kevin says, it's big sky country.
Yeah. I can understand that. So continuing on with the road walking, there's lots of creeks through this section.
Dry.
Towards dry creeks, and then towards the end you managed to get some water in you.
Yeah, so there's basically this old transmission line, and it looks really scary because it looks like it's live power lines that have been burnt, and they're just like toppled over, and there's just cables, and they've got a sign that says it's not in operation anymore. But when we got to that point, when I got there, the trail sort of petered out at one point, but I'm kind of glad it did because I realized that there was a creek. I was like, this feels like, it's really densely grown here. I think if I just keep walking here, I'll get to a creek. And there it was.
Yeah.
So, later on I found there was actually like a creek flowing right through the track. But it certainly was like, manna from heaven to finally have water.
Back to the power lines. I'm disappointed if you knew they weren't live, you didn't reenact the Alan Grant from Jurassic Park.
I didn't want to touch it just in case.
You could, done like an Alan Grant, Russell Coit kind of, I'll just go up and touch it.
Yeah, it's pretty dodgy looking. But that section actually was the start. From here on, it just got really awesome. Like the scenery, because the plains were stunning. Like they're sort of like glacially carved plains. And there's just something about the scenery here from this point on to the end of the day that just really just picked up in like spectacularness.
Yeah. Water, fantastic scenery. I'm guessing Don was in heaven, or...
Yeah, I was. Because I was like, at the start of the day, I was like, yeah, this is okay. But from here on, I was like, yeah, you got me.
Hadn't reached Valhalla yet, but we'll get to that later. So McKay's hut, what was that like as an afternoon and evening stay?
Fantastic. So I bumped into some cyclists actually along the way, because this area is very commonly used by bikepackers as well. I actually think this area would be spectacular and fantastic to do as a bikepacking trip. I think in some ways almost better than hiking it, because you'll get to cover more ground in a day.
Yeah.
And also, there's the ups and downs, which is always fun on a bike.
Yeah.
So, yeah, definitely, I met the guys there on one of the hills. I got to a particular hill. I was like, I can call Alyssa. So I, called Alyssa, just let her know I was going. Saw these cyclists, had a chat with them, and they said, yeah, we might see you at the hut. But, for them, because the distances made sense, they kept going to the next hut. So I had Mackies to myself. And this was great because it had the snow gums growing around the hut.
Yeah.
It is an old hut, so it's like, it is a truly vintage hut. The toilet is like stunningly placed right in the middle of the field. And there's a thing that they do there where the toilets have an upper door and a lower door.
Okay, I was just about to ask, was it a loo with a view?
Yes, it is. So the toilets, all the toilets here have an upper and a lower door, so you can close the bottom bit and then look out at the scenery.
I mean, why not? Why not? I think some of the older ones on the overland track could use with that just to get rid of the smell.
So yeah, scenery was great. I had, again, I had the hut to myself. I decided, even though it wasn't an emergency, but I was like, look, no one's here. It's a victimless crime for me to use this stretcher bed and sleep in here. So there was definitely some rodent action in the main room, but in the sleeping quarters side of it, it was fine. So yeah.
So they need a resident snake there, do they?
There probably is, but I didn't see it, and I'm glad.
Yeah. So day 3, so this was to Greymare Hut, where you stayed about 22 kilometres, and this was one of your better days, maybe even your best day?
I think this is probably the best day, because the scenery was outstanding for pretty much the whole day. There was nothing there that I was like, this is crap. I passed a lot of creeks, so I definitely always had water, which was nice. The creeks were spectacular. So they've got granite boulders that you can kind of cross, and no one ever crosses at the fords because the fords are too deep to walk in. Yeah. But generally, 50 meters or 20 meters down on up or downstream, there'll be some crossing point that is nicer,
easier. Yeah.
So I did a few of these, and the creek crossings are wonderful. The water is delicious because it's not glacial, but it's alpine water. So I really enjoyed the travel this day, and there was this one particular section where you're sort of walking along, and there was just this valley, and you saw Mount Jagungal in the background. And that was just to me, that was one of the iconic moments of that day. That, and also there was snow gums as well.
Bit of tree hugging going on.
Absolutely, because it was a privilege to have this section that was actually a lot of happy, healthy snow gums, which I didn't have as much on the previous day.
Yeah. No, they're certainly iconic trees. You probably see from a lot of paintings from colonial times of the intricate bark and colours and everything. That great to see out there, and no wonder you hugged them.
Oh yeah, and look, if they could grow nicely here, I'd plant one in my backyard. But I don't think they grow very well here, given the conditions.
Just drop some ice cubes at the base. You never know.
And in fact, there's a Lego Botanical Garden set that's just come out, and one of the trees is a snow gum in the actual set. So it's it's an iconic tree.
Yeah. Well, you can still have it. It'll just be in your office.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, one of the stops you had today was O'Keefe's hut for lunch.
Yeah, so O'Keefe's is pretty cool. It's sort of just in the shadow of Mount Jagungal. It was really busy. There was a group of teenagers that were there, or they might be early 20s. I can't tell anymore. I'm too old.
Young'uns.
Young'uns. And the cyclists, one of them actually messaged me afterwards and said, hey, we should have stayed with you because it was really busy. Because I think it was that group plus another group and them.
Yeah.
And then when I got there, my camera stopped working.
Oh,
And I was like, no. So that was a bit of a freak out moment when that happened. But I sort of got it working again, and then it stopped working. And then I went, okay, so we're going to have to film the rest of this on my phone because I wanted to like salvage what I thought was like a lost cause.
Yeah.
So I switched to filming with my phone. But, you know, like, so that bit sort of really frazzles me. But if I like remove myself from that, the scenery was like really good for the whole day as well after that. Because you sort of go around the mountain and then you sort of walk along this sort of... There's two bits that are really cool here. You walk through this valley that looks like it's been carved by a glacier, and there's all these old sort of snow poles sort of sticking out. And then you go up a hill, and then you're on this ridge, and the ridge sort of emerges, and up on the hill you see Greymare Hut, and it just looks so cool with the scenery here. And then from there, like, you descend to a creek, and you go up to the hut, and this hut used to be like I think it was an old tin mine, and a lot of the old mining infrastructure is still there, so there's like just like these machinery everywhere. And then the water supply is actually like they put a pipe from the old, I think like the mine flooded, and they put a pipe so you could actually get, you know, fill up, and the water's coming from the old mine.
Tin flavored water.
Yeah, so that was all good, and you know, watching the sunset there. You know, my cover photo has the cheesy, like, you know, like hands to the sky.
Yeah.
Because it was just like, it was spectacular.
Yeah.
Less spectacular was the sleep, though.
Really? Why is that?
So I again decided I was going to stay in the hut, and this was a mistake because it was extremely rat infested.
Oh.
And I could tell that something was going to happen when I was in the hut, and I could hear so much rustling in there's like a room to the side where they store the wood. I could just hear a lot of moving. I was like, this is not going to be good. So I actually set up the inner of my tent inside the hut, and I'm glad I did, because as I was sleeping, like, I had my head torch and I could like shine it, and it was just like rats, like just checking out my stuff.
Yeah. So it wasn't orcs burrowing under the house, aka rings of power.
Nope, it was rats.
Old-fashioned rats.
Yeah, and like very inquisitive rats that are just like, let's have a look inside here. Let's have a look. So I hung my pack up. I'm glad that I had this. They couldn't crawl over me because I was pretty grossed out.
Yeah.
And I was like, in hindsight, this would have been better. But the thing was, it was going to rain the next day, and I really didn't want to pack up a wet tent.
Yeah, it's a bit of a trade-off there.
Yeah, so it felt like a bit of like a dirty old hut that wasn't great to stay in. But then packing up a wet tent is never fun. And like, I know like that's not an emergency.
Yeah.
But I was like, I think I can get away with it.
Yeah,
The
rats are staying there, I'll stay there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned the weather was coming in, and this forced you to do a bit of a route change, didn't it?
So this day, I didn't do a route change on this day, but it seeing what I was seeing made me realize I needed to make a change. So I went through to this day, and it was like sort of like a gentle, light rain, kind of like a Melbourne rain, you know, like just that light that just keeps going all day kind of rain. So it wasn't too bad. You know, I was able to enjoy the day still. Scenery wasn't as open because it was cloudier. But what I did see was great. And then also Valentine's hut is like, I think, one of the nicest huts in this area.
Yeah, I mean, it's iconic because it's, you know, bright red, or is it bright white?
It's like bright red with like love hearts.
Yeah, with white love hearts. I'm like, it just, I don't know, it looks very kitschy and twee. I'm like, that's not something I would expect out there. So what's the story behind Valentine's
So
hut?
I think so. The red is actually functional. So like a lot of these huts, there's another one called I think like Kuta Patamba hut that's like red because it's often buried in snow, and so the bright red is actually really good because you'll see it. And there used to be ones that were, and I wish that they still did this, that were bright orange. And so that was, it was a safety reason. But then obviously someone has painted love hearts on it.
Yeah.
But it was like really nice inside compared to some of the other ones. Like it actually, so it had been recently painted, so it smelt of paint inside.
Yeah. I mean, painting it white inside, it's more airy and it's not like that dark, damp kind of, murder hut kind of vibe that
Oh yeah, it's
a lot of them have.
It felt more like, to me, it felt more like like the older huts on the overland, where they still feel like they're inviting to stay in, but maybe they're not state of the art.
Yeah.
So it felt like that. Like it felt enclosed. It didn't feel like rats like can squeeze through like gaps in the floorboards. The bunks were, there's a lot of bunks in there, so it's obviously designed for people to stay in a bit more. And also the location is great. It's like right by like this bend in the river with nice scenery. So great hut, and it was definitely I'm pretty sure that's a little Donny moment. I'm pretty sure I remember seeing it in a book.
Yeah.
As a kid, so I was really pleased to sort of tick that off my bucket list.
Yeah, nice. So this day has a lot of rivers and pleasant scenery through it. So yeah, lots of crossing of rivers. Were they easy to cross? Like, did you have to go knee deep or anything like that?
No, they were pretty good. I mean, so I think had I crossed it the next day, that'd be a different story because the rain had like really picked up. But the ones that I was walking, that I had to cross through what's referred to as the Jagungal Wilderness. So the Jagungal Wilderness is sort of not as maintained. You don't have the infrastructure. So part of the reason why they don't have a trail and it's just the fire trail is that it is considered a wilderness, so they don't want to build anything new.
Yeah.
I mean, they'll build a hut and they'll build toilets. But other than that, they won't build trails or anything or bridges. And it was interesting because once, like, after Valentine's Hut, there was like another creek, and this was bridged. And I was like, where have these been? And it's because we had left the wilderness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. So lots of road walking from there, and then you came to a quite interesting hut that has a bit of a fancy name.
Yes. So it's called Schlink Hut, but it's known by everyone as the Schlink Hilton, because as far as huts go, and I'd say even other than maybe New Pelion and maybe Burt Nichols on the Overland, this is like absurdly gigantic hut. And what you can actually see is like half of it's closed off, so it's like just stupidly large, multiple rooms. It has like a large common room. It's just ridiculously large. Particularly, all the other huts are much more rustic. You're probably looking at 4 people can stay in there.
Yeah.
Whereas this is like, probably if you opened the whole thing, it's like 40 people could stay.
Do you know the reason why it's out there and why it's so large?
I think the reason it's so large is because it was like used by the people who were doing like snowy hydro or something like that is the reason. I'm probably like butchering the facts here. But
And this is another emergency only hut.
I guess so.
Yeah.
It seems absurdly gigantic for an emergency hut, but it's open. You can go in. There were a lot of signs now because they were put up during COVID where they were discouraging people to stay inside, and you probably wouldn't want to stay inside if there was a lot of people.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was ostensibly an emergency hut, but it's like a mansion.
Yeah. And this was your lunch stop for the day, so not like you could enjoy the extravagance of so much space.
Yeah, so look, I could have stayed here for the night, but I wanted to position myself better. So even with my original plan, which was I was going to do less Ks but more challenging Ks, because my original plan was an off-track walk. I wanted to be basically like right where I need to start for that. And I'm glad that I did continue going because I had all the time in the world really to get to the next hut. But the Schlinkhilton Wild Fancy is not, it's not that long a distance from where I stayed the next night, and I still had daylight hours and time.
Yeah.
So it made sense to just keep going.
Yeah. So your end for the day was White River Hut.
That's right. Yeah.
So not as deluxe.
But I will say, I think this is, in my many, many years of hiking, one of my favorite nights out on a trail.
Was this due to the fireplace and the weather that came in?
Yeah, but basically I was by myself. The weather was just went terrible overnight. I knew it was coming because I checked the forecast and it was severe. This is when Sydney was having flooding. So yes, it's not right near Sydney, but with some of the weather patterns were definitely felt up in this area. So the creek in the front of the hut, when I crossed it in that afternoon, was quite low, and it had doubled in height by the next day when I came through. So yeah, I was by myself in this hut, had a fire. It was storming outside. I sort of made my plans I had to change my plans for what I was going to do, and it just felt good. I had some music playing. Because I knew I was going to change my plans, I ate a double dinner. So it was really good. Yeah. It was really nice in this hut, and it wasn't. I heard people say, Kevin said to me, "Oh, White's is okay. Slink is better," but I think the circumstances being what they were, it actually was perfect, and I would not have traded that at all.
Yeah, it's a good happy Don moment.
Oh yeah, I loved this. I will remember this from this hike. If there was one moment that was great, was just that evening in the hut was lovely.
Yeah. Will you remember the next day as for fondly?
I'll remember it as type 2 fun, not as... Yeah. So, obviously, as you said, I had to change my plans. The perfect weather plan. And it sucks because for weeks, the weather had been outstandingly perfect, sunny, clear skies. So Kevin did this a week before me in the other direction and had perfect weather. You watch his video and it's so good. And a lot of people who do the AAWT say that the best part of the whole thing is taking the alternate route where rather than following what's the official AAWT, you head across what's called Consett Stephen Pass and past Mount Tate and a few other places, and that takes you across the main range to the main range track, where that eventually leads you to Kosciuszko. So I was really looking forward to that. I've done the main range track in the past, and it's one of my favorite. I think it's easily in my top 10 day walks in Australia, but not to be, unfortunately. So yeah.
So instead of doing a nice top 10 walk, you got a lot of road walking.
I did 30 Ks of road walking or something I think it was 30 Ks.
Character testing, road walking that kind of puts Marin Road into perspective a little bit.
The scenery is nicer than Marin Road, but the roadness of it was worse than Marin Road.
Yeah, because it's a proper road.
It's a proper road. Yeah. It's the access road to get to some of the villages that are up that way. It's like Guthaga and it's the road from Jindabyne to Guthaga.
Yeah.
And I've experienced a lot of, when we walk on the Bib, I think people think of WA as dry. Kevin sort of realized, it's not. When we walk in the peak season, it's pretty rainy. But I have never walked through just continuous heavy rain like this. Not even on the worst Bib day have I had this much rain.
Because I've had this I met some Victorians while I was doing one of the sections. And they were like, yeah, it really just is showers. The rain comes through and then it stops and it's sunny. But that's not what you experienced. It's just the rain came through and then it stayed
And
kept
it was
going.
like heavy rain.
Yeah.
And I started out not having the umbrella because it was really windy, because from White's River you're sort of heading across a pass down towards like the Guthica Dam. And so it was really windy to start with, and so I didn't have the umbrella. And my phone started shorting out. Like the screen was just slowly dying over this and the next day. And by the end of it, I had like a black screen that I couldn't even see, and I had to like, from memory, remember where things were.
So is this your smartphone or your dumb phone?
My smartphone.
Smartphone.
And I wish I had my dumb phone as a backup, because it was like terrible. You know, I have like, this phone is not working anymore. And yeah, so it was pretty terrible. I was pretty drenched. Like my raincoat was, you know, it's a pretty good shell, and it was useless by the end of it. I could feel I was drenched underneath.
Yeah.
My shoes were filled because rain was just running down my legs into there. When I eventually got the umbrella out at Guthiga Dam, what I hadn't sort of taken into account was that the rain would fall onto my pack. So even though the yarn pack is like semi-waterproof, it's not designed for like constant rain dripping down onto it. Yeah. So that really sucked.
Yeah.
But I was very glad because I went to stay in Valhalla.
Yes. So yeah, your end point for the day was Perisher, and you had a nice warm meal, and the place you stayed at, Valhalla, had a nice message for you as well. I'm guessing that was a nice comfort at the end of a tough day. So
good. So like, you know, I got there, and so before you get to Perisher, there's like Smiggin holes, and it's a hole because it's like, it's not in season. So it was just like trucks everywhere. Like they just was like, oh, I guess no one's here. We'll just dump all our shit everywhere. And then I had to walk up this road to there, and nothing was open because like no one visits at this time of year.
Yeah.
But then Valhalla was like figuratively Valhalla and literally Valhalla. And they had like a nice welcome message. Because it's a ski lodge, they had a drying room so all my stuff could get dried out. They had a washing machine so I could wash my stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, it was so good. Yeah, it made me really happy. And the sticking point, so my plan had originally been, I always was prepared for weather to be bad. So my plan had been I was going to walk to Guthiga Dam, then walk to Guthiga, and then walk to where the main range track crosses the Snowy River. I was going to camp by there because you're allowed to camp by the river there. But when I saw how, you know, I was thinking, look, the rain is so terrible. I don't want to be camping next to a river.
Yeah.
And so at the last minute, I messaged Leanne, who was from Snowy Connect, who dropped me off at the start of the hike. Because she said, if you're in trouble, just give me a call. You know, I'm happy to help you out. So she has a friend who ran this the snow lodge. And they said, look, you know, we don't normally sort of accept just, you know, someone just walking in, but we'll see what we can do because, you know, it's really dependent on the food because we will cook a meal.
Yeah.
And at the time I was like, oh, it doesn't matter. I'll just eat. I just really need somewhere to you know, to just dry up. And I'm so glad because the food was like really good.
What did you have?
I can't remember what it was, but it was like, it was a delicious meal of like a, you know, like a 3-course meal. The dessert was good. There was, you know, there was some mead that they serve at the start. There was, you know, some beer, some wine. It was so good. And also like when I got there, I bought like some instant noodles to eat from them, and that would have been like good enough.
Yeah.
But then for some reason their kettle wasn't working, so the lady was like, "Oh well, we've got leftovers from last night's dinner. You can have it." So I had like Thai green curry for lunch. So
yum.
yeah, I was really happy.
Yeah.
After like the misery of the day. Yeah.
It's just, yeah, it's one of those things, like, if you know you're staying somewhere warm and dry, like, it doesn't really matter that you're walking through rain for a whole day.
Yeah, like there was a lot of times where, it was so terrible and I was just laughing and smiling
Yeah.
because I knew that the suffering was only so long.
Yeah,
This too will pass.
Yeah, it's not like, you're going through that to then either stay in a hut or you have to set up your tent in the rain.
Oh,
I remember doing that coming into Walpole. Like, the last 10 kilometres was just in the pouring rain. I'm just like, I'm having the best time. I'll splash in puddles because I know I'll have a wine and a warm meal tonight.
yeah.
So yeah, obviously warm and dry sleep tonight, and then on to your last day, which is the finish in Kosciuszko.
That's right. So my original plan had been, look, I was gonna walk it all the way to the end, but the challenge was that it was either I was gonna have to leave it like really early and miss breakfast, or accept a lift to, just down the road. So I just went, look, I know it's a little bit cheating, but
Is it though? Because, like, who's going to tell you off or say that you didn't do it?
Exactly. So I mean, look, so one of the things is that from Perisher, they have built, as part of the Snowy's Alpine Walk, there was a section I could have walked that would have taken me to the start of the track to the summit. But when the lady who ran Valhalla said, look, I can drop you off tomorrow, then you don't have to miss breakfast, and it's, and I was like, yeah, okay.
Okay, if you twist my arm.
Yeah. And breakfast was good too. The food was good. Like I would completely recommend Valhalla. I would stay there again. Like if Alyssa and I and Miles do the Snowy's Alpine Track, we will definitely stay here.
Yeah.
Yep.
Nice.
Even though it was pretty expensive.
Yeah, it sounds like you got a pretty good deal.
Yeah. It's like, it's expensive, but what you get is value.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you got dropped off, and then it's kind of joining it's a road walk, but it's not really, because it used to be the old summit track.
Yeah, so that in the old days, you as is typical of the car-centric era, you used to be able to drive to the summit of Kosciuszko, and then they realized, this isn't really good for the environment, so they closed it off, and now it's sort of like a cobblestone walkway. It wasn't like that when I did it before. I remember it being more like a dirt trail, but they've done it up a bit, and you see a lot of cyclists doing it, families. So this is probably the less nice way of doing it. Had the weather been better, I would have done the main range track. So the main range track takes you down, and you go past like Carruthers Creek and Blue Lake and a few other things that are really stunning. Like I recommend if anyone's ever not been to Kosciuszko before, please go do the main range track because it's spectacular. But I was a bit done. The weather was crap, and I was like, "What's the point?" Like, and look, the scenery is great from here because you get to see, the plains of across the main range. You get to see the headwaters of the Snowy River.
Did you see the man from Snowy River?
I always think that when I see it, and I think it's such an iconic part of Australian folklore, and to actually be standing there, and it's actually beautiful.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're like, oh yeah, this is okay, but it's like really truly stunning up there. And then at Seaman's Hut, my phone basically became unusable. And so I'd kept away my camera because of the data issue I was having with the camera. I was like, look, if I'm gonna actually finish filming this, I'm gonna have to get that camera out. So I got that camera out. And I was like, I'm gonna risk the data integrity, and film the end with that. So it was a mix of that. My phone would like suddenly sometimes work again, and I had that, and sort of like that I limped it through to the end from that point on.
Because sometimes my camera does that, where it would be like, it'll throw an error. I'm just like, uh-oh, like what's happened? You just take the memory card out, put it back in. It's like, yeah, okay, I'm working again.
Yep.
Yeah. But you got through to the end and kind of more towards the touristy part of Kosciuszko leading to the summit.
Yeah, so when I did the main range track in the past, I did the summit bit, but because I was doing the loop, so the bit that I did was sort of the end of closing the loop. Whereas this time I went down to where the chairlift is down towards Perisher. And so this was like super busy, even though the weather was crap. So many people up at the summit, you know, like it's definitely a anticlimactic summit. Even on a clear day, it's an anticlimactic summit.
Yeah.
On a poor visibility day, it's even more anticlimactic. But just the fact that I finished it, you know, like with everything that had gone wrong. So, you know, like, first of all, I wasn't even meant to be doing this walk because I was meant to be doing the Snowy's Alpine walk. I was meant to do it in December, but then I had Achilles tendinopathy. Then, like, the week before, Alyssa and Miles, like, Alyssa had been, like, sitting next to someone who had, like, COVID at a staff meeting, had been sitting down next to them for an hour. And there was this whole, like, just this thing where, like, they left suddenly because we were like, well, I don't want to get sick before this. So it was just all these things that just built up to this moment. And the fact that I persevered through, you know, I walked like 30 Ks along roads to get to the end. And then, yes, I did get a lift the next day. But look, the fact that I actually got to Kosciuszko was an achievement.
And then some kid just stood in your shot while you were trying to film.
Yeah. So, like, if you notice in the video, there's like this kid that just starts like walking in. But then the thumbnail, like, thank goodness for like Photoshop AI.
That as well. I think the cover of my last book, there was a guy in like a red jacket. I'm like, you're going. Thanks, AI.
So I was like, yeah, painting over you. Yes, gone.
Yeah.
And then like the walk down to, so you walk through like what's called like the Ram's Head Range, through like sections of that to the chairlift that takes you down to Perisher. And that's such a cool way to finish the walk. You finish it going down along this chairlift, and the weather had like cleared out, and it was wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just get to reflect on a nice journey while you sit 20-30 meters up in the air.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I'm glad it wasn't windy, because I had this worry of like, what if it's like super windy and like really terrible? But it actually like cleared out, and it was nice, and I really enjoyed the ending, even though like it wasn't, you know, the last day was good, but the second last day wasn't the exciting walk it was going to be.
Yeah. So even with all of that and kind of the issues that you had, what are kind of some final thoughts on this walk that you took away?
So I think one of the things I'll say is it's not sort of like spectacular the whole way, but there's definitely the second part of the second day, days 3 and 4 were spectacular. Day 5, had I gone the actual way, would have been spectacular, and and the final day was also spectacular. But it's a really spectacular walk in so far as what you get, and keep bearing in mind that this area has had fire damage, and you know I had to make a change that was a last minute change. I think the historic huts are really cool. I think that really adds a lot of character to the walk. I think I'm going to sound a bit Bonnie-esque, had they like replaced it and built more modern huts, I think it wouldn't have the same character.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of cool that they've maintained a certain, like they've kind of locked it, like this is how it was, and that's it.
Yeah.
That's it. I really like that about it, because it does add, even on the bits that are burnt and a bit ho-hum scenery-wise, you have this historic overlay that is unique, because a lot of places don't have these old huts. You know, they're if you think about sort of New Zealand great walks or Tassie, you know, they're sort of great walks, they're constantly being updated, and there's this sort of thing of like trying to, I guess, chase what's the trend is.
Yeah. So yeah, I kind of get where you like coming from, in that they want to maintain what it always has been.
Yeah.
Like, you know, you walk over a ridge and you expect to see a man in a dry as a bone.
And
a Cobra riding a horse, like that kind of feel to it, rather than, you know, these metrics have shown that these type of tourists and visitors are going to prepared to pay this money to do this experience, so we're going to provide that. And
yeah, and I think there's a place for that. Like, I'm definitely not an anti, you know, like, I think we've talked about this in that I'm not a anti-hut person or an anti-development person, but I'm anti-privatization person when it comes to these huts. Like, I don't mind if they're government huts. Like, I think it's fine what they've done, you know, like in Tassie with some of the huts, and what they're doing with this new development has, you know, with the new trail that they're building, which is a bit controversial. I'm okay with that, as long as it's not privatized. That's where I kind of draw the line.
Yeah, as long as you don't need to spend $5,000 to get a helicopter out to do this part of the wilderness that then is cut off to other people to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think there's a place for that, and there's a place for this as well. And I really enjoyed it. I love the high country. I've loved it from the first time I went there, you know, many years ago. And I think that this is a really good entryway to doing the AAWT as just a sectional bit. It's user friendly. It's not busy, so it's certainly quieter than the Bibbulmun, while having the facilities. Whereas, you know, there are, as Kevin kind of talked about, there's some other parts of the track that are really rough. This is not one of those sections. Yeah.
In terms of your own personal experience, like, these longer solo trips are something that you've had to do in the last year, I would say.
Yeah.
How did you enjoy this as a, like, brand new 6-day experience on your own, whereas with the Cape to Cape you'd done that previously and then had done it again solo?
No, it's a good question. Look, I definitely missed Miles and Alyssa a lot doing this. I realized that I'm not necessarily a fan of doing these sort of walks by myself. With the Cape to Cape, you know, there was a group of kids, and there was like a father and son and some other people I was walking with who I sort of befriended, and they kind of made the experience feel less lonely than it was. Whereas this was really, truly by myself. I barely saw people, and I didn't necessarily love that. I actually probably prefer having, you know, at least Alyssa with me. So, like, you know, I'm going away for 2.5 weeks soon to do hiking, and part of that I'm doing with some friends, and part of it I'm doing by myself, and we'll see. You know, we'll see how that is. But suddenly, I've chosen an easier, more user-friendly trail to do by myself. And then the harder one I'm doing it with friends, because I think it will feel nicer.
Or at least, like, being peak season New Zealand, you're probably not going to be alone on the easier hike.
And look, the trails in New Zealand that we're doing, even though they're not great walks, they're still popular. You know? It's not going to be like the AAWT where I saw, like, hardly anyone for days.
So I'm not sure whether it's like this for you, but for me, there's like a cutoff point, and it's usually about a day and a half into, like, a week-long hike, where I'm kind of, like, downish a little bit for the first day and a half and thinking about home a lot, and then it's like there's a switch. I'm just like, I'm dialed in. I'm really enjoying this. Is it like that for you?
I think I probably am. I think earlier on I was fine, and then, like, the sort of layers of challenge, like the camera not working, you know, having to change the plans and stuff like that. All that stuff kind of weighed a bit on me at the time. So in hindsight, like, I think about it, and it's a, you know, great walk, but then there were things that were just like, why? And, you know, being by yourself just made it that bit worse. So, like, I was meant to go and do a trip in July. I actually cancelled it because I just didn't enjoy the experience of being by myself that much, and I felt like July was too soon after April. And I'm kind of glad, because I think, like, I'm going away for a longer stretch at the end of the year, but I'd rather have that one longer stretch and feel a bit crap about being by myself, and then not have to go away in little bits.
And logistically, like when you're on your own, it's a lot harder as well.
Yes.
Like if you're having to organise transfers and car hire and flights and accommodation, like it's a lot.
Yep.
Yeah, so I understand that.
Yep.
All right, so that was Kiandra to Kosciuszko, a kind of user-friendly entry point into the AAWT.
Yep.
And a thoroughly enjoyable experience you'd recommend.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I wouldn't say thoroughly enjoyable, but certainly enjoyable.
Potential for thoroughly enjoyable.
Yeah, I think if the trees on the first day and second day weren't burnt, and you could walk across the main range through the off-track section, I'm sure it probably is like something that you'll put up there as one of your best hikes. But it was very good considering.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening. I'll let you do the sign-off song.
Thank you everyone for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode or any other episode of Real Trail Talk, then please rate us on whatever platform you're currently listening to us on. Ratings really help us to reach an audience, especially those who are looking to learn about the outdoors in Western Australia and Australia in general. If you had any questions or suggestions for future episodes, you can email us at realtrailtalk@gmail.com or contact us through our social media channels. Thanks again, and stay tuned for our next episode.